Welcome back to Woven English, my friends. You have seen that face before. Maybe on a t-shirt. Maybe on a poster in a cafe. Maybe in a movie. That thin, elegant man with the long, upward curling mustache, the sharp eyes, the dramatic expression. The image that makes you stop and say, "Who is this person?" That man is Salvador Dalí. And here is something that will surprise you. That mustache, that famous, impossible-looking mustache, Dalí shaped it every single morning like a piece of art. He once said it was his most important antenna, an antenna that connected him to the universe. Now think about that. Most people wake up and comb their hair. Dalí woke up and sculpted his face. This was not vanity. This was identity. This was a man who believed that every part of himself, his appearance, his words, his paintings, his very existence was a work of art. But behind that dramatic image, there was a life full of pain, confusion, obsession, and extraordinary brilliance. In this video, you are not just going to learn about a famous painter. You are going to enter the mind of a man who refused to see the world the way everyone else did. A man who took his dreams, literally his sleeping dreams, and turned them into images the world had never seen before. From a deeply troubled childhood to a love story unlike anything in history, to paintings that still make people stop and question reality, this is the full, true story of Salvador Dalí. And here is your English bonus as we go. Pay attention to the language used to describe emotions, identity, and creativity. You will hear powerful phrases and ways of expressing complex feelings. This kind of vocabulary is exactly what helps your English move from good to unforgettable. But before we begin the story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it there? Whether it is morning coffee time, late night study time, or something in between, I want to know. Let's see how many countries are represented in the comments today. Now, let's begin. The year is 1904. The place is Figueres, a small, quiet town in the northeast of Spain, close to the border with France. On May 11th, a boy is born. His parents name him Salvador. In Spanish, this name means the Savior. It is a name full of weight, full of meaning, and it would define his entire life, but not in the way his parents expected. Now, here is where the story takes its first strange turn. Before Dalí was born, his parents had another son, also named Salvador. And that child had died less than a year before our Dalí came into the world. Imagine this moment. A family shattered by grief. A mother and father who lost one child and now held another in their arms. And instead of allowing themselves to simply welcome this new life, they did something unusual. They began to believe that this new baby, this new Salvador, was the spirit of the child they had lost. A reincarnation, a return. They even took young Dalí to visit his brother's grave. They told him, "You are him. You are both of you. Now stop and imagine what that does to a child's mind. From his very earliest memories, Dalí did not know exactly who he was. Was he himself? Was he his dead brother? Was he two people? One living and one ghost? He wrote about this later in his life. He said this experience created a deep fracture inside him, a crack in his sense of self that never fully healed. And that crack, that uncertainty, that feeling of living between two identities, it became the fuel for everything he created. This is something important to understand. Many great artists, writers, and thinkers carry an early wound, a confusion, a question they cannot answer. And instead of hiding from that question, they spend their whole life turning it into something the world can see and feel. Dalí's wound was identity, and his paintings became the answers he could never find in words. Now, his family was not poor. His father was a notary, a respected man of law, serious, structured, strict. He believed in order, in discipline, in following rules. He had high expectations. His mother was gentler, softer. She saw something in young Salvador that his father sometimes could not see. She nurtured his imagination. She allowed him to be strange. And she died when Dalí was just 16 years old. That loss hit him deeply. He never stopped talking about his mother throughout his life. But even before her death, his childhood was full of intensity. He was not like other children. He was sensitive beyond what most children could manage. Small things, the texture of a grasshopper, the way light moved across a wall, the sound of a crowd, could overwhelm him completely. He experienced what we might now recognize as extreme anxiety, and yet he drew, he painted, he created. By the time he was a young teenager, people around him were already saying, "This boy is different." Not just talented, different. And in his case, different was the beginning of everything. In 1922, Dalí left Figueres and traveled to Madrid. He was 18 years old. He had been accepted into the most prestigious art school in Spain, the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando. This should have been the beginning of a perfect story. Talented young artist enters great school, works hard, succeeds. But Dalí was not interested in a perfect story. From the moment he arrived in Madrid, he was noticed, not for his humility or his discipline, but for his strangeness. He dressed unusually. Long coat, wide-brimmed hat, long hair. He moved through the school like a character from a different century. He quoted philosophy. He spoke with dramatic intensity. He performed himself as much as he painted. And he was brilliant. That part is important. He was genuinely, technically brilliant. His professors acknowledged this. His peers could see it. He could draw with a precision and control that went far beyond his age. But being brilliant was not enough for Dalí. He needed to be original. He began to challenge his teachers, not rudely at first, but relentlessly. He questioned their methods. He questioned their standards. He asked why art had to look a certain way, follow certain rules, achieve certain goals. And then came the moment that defined his time at the academy. During one of his final examinations, a panel of professors sat before him, ready to assess his work and decide if he would pass. Dalí looked at them calmly and said something that stunned the room. He said that none of them were qualified to judge him. Silence. He was expelled. Not once. He was actually suspended twice before his final expulsion. The second time, he refused to accept the judgment of any professor over his work. The school had no choice. Now listen carefully to what happened next, because this is a lesson many people miss. When Dalí was expelled, the world did not end. He was not destroyed. He was not defeated. He was freed. He returned to Figueres. He read obsessively philosophy, psychology, the new and exciting ideas of Sigmund Freud about the unconscious mind. He began to understand something that would change his art forever. The most interesting things in a human being are the things they don't understand about themselves. The dreams, the fears, the irrational images that appear without invitation. That was where he wanted to go. The academy had taught him technique, and he was grateful for that. Technique is a tool, and Dalí used it masterfully for the rest of his life. But the academy could not teach him what to do with a mind like his. That he had to discover alone. In the late 1920s, Dalí traveled to Paris. Paris in this era was electric. It was the center of a new movement that was shaking the art world. Surrealism. And Surrealism was exactly the world Dalí had been preparing for his entire life without knowing it. Surrealism was led by a writer named André Breton. The central idea was this: the conscious, rational mind is only a small part of who we are. Beneath it, in the unconscious, in dreams, in fears, in desires we cannot explain, there lives a deeper, stranger, more honest truth, and art should go there. Art should dig into that hidden space and bring something back. For most artists, this was a new idea, a challenge, an experiment. For Dalí, it was simply a description of how his mind already worked. He met the Surrealists. He impressed them immediately. Breton recognized that Dalí was extraordinary, not just a supporter of the movement, but potentially its most powerful voice. And then Dalí did something no one had quite done before. He developed what he called the Paranoiac-Critical Method. This sounds very technical, but the idea is simple, and it is extraordinary. Dalí trained himself to enter a state at the edge of sleep. That moment, you may know it, when you are not quite awake and not quite dreaming, when images begin to appear on their own, when your rational mind relaxes and something else takes over. He would sit in a chair holding a key over a metal plate. As he drifted toward sleep, his hand would relax. The key would drop. The noise would wake him. and he would immediately paint what he had just seen in that borderland between waking and dreaming. He was not painting the world around him. He was painting the world inside him. And in 1931, he created a painting that would make him immortal, the persistence of memory. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine this scene. A vast, empty landscape, cliffs in the distance, a still, flat surface, golden afternoon light, and silence. Complete silence, and then the watches. Melting watches. Soft, drooping, folding over the edges of surfaces like wet cloth. A watch draped over a tree branch. Another collapsing over a strange, faceless form. Another closed and covered in ants. Time. The most reliable, rigid thing in human experience. The thing that rules our days, our schedules, our lives, melting, collapsing, becoming soft and meaningless. The message, whether Dalí intended it or not, struck people like lightning. Maybe time is not as solid as we think. Maybe reality itself is not as solid as we think. The painting was small, barely larger than a sheet of paper, but its impact was enormous. When it was shown in New York, people stood before it in silence, then in argument, then in wonder. Some said it was genius. Some said it was nonsense. Some said it was the most disturbing image they had ever seen. But no one forgot it. And no one forgot the name of the man who painted it. Salvador Dalí. Overnight, he became more than an artist. He became a phenomenon. Fame came to Dalí fast. But something else had already arrived that mattered even more. Her name was Gala. She was born Elena Dmitrievna Diakonova in Russia. She was 10 years older than Dalí. She was sharp, intelligent, unconventional, and deeply perceptive. When she met Dalí in 1929, she was married to the French poet Paul Éluard. But what happened between her and Dalí could not be stopped. Their first meeting was intense. Dalí later described it as the moment his real life began. He was terrified of her. He admired her. He needed her. He loved her with an urgency that was almost desperate, and she chose him. Now understand what Gala meant to Dalí, not just romantically, but existentially. Dalí was a man of enormous inner chaos. His mind raced constantly. His emotions were extreme. He could be brilliant one moment and completely destabilized the next. He suffered from fears, obsessions, social anxieties that could stop him from functioning. Gala was the opposite. She was calm where he was chaotic, practical where he was lost, decisive where he was paralyzed. She became his manager, his organizer, his shield against the world. She negotiated his contracts. She managed his money. She decided what he would paint and when he would show it. She turned his extraordinary talent into a sustainable, powerful career. He painted her face hundreds of times. He called her my Gala, my life, my salvation. He signed many of his works, not just Dalí, but Gala Salvador Dalí, as if they were one person. Some people found this strange. Some critics found it unhealthy. But for Dalí, Gala was the anchor that kept his extraordinary mind connected to the earth. With her support, his career exploded. He moved between Europe and America, living lavishly in New York, filling rooms with his presence. He appeared in advertisements. He designed shop windows. He worked with filmmakers, photographers, fashion designers. He created theatrical performances. He collaborated with Alfred Hitchcock and Walt Disney. He became a brand. He became a personality. He became, in his own word, a vida dollars, an anagram that critics created from his name, suggesting he was greedy for money and fame. Dalí laughed at this. He wore it like a decoration. He was expelled from the Surrealist group, officially, by André Breton, who accused him of being too commercialized, too interested in money, too willing to abandon political values for fame. Dalí's response was characteristically dramatic. He said, "I am Surrealism, not a member, not a follower, the thing itself." This is either the statement of a deluded ego, or the statement of someone who understood exactly how large his contribution had been. Perhaps it was both. His life during these decades was a performance as much as a career. He kept a pet ocelot, a wild cat, and walked it on a leash in public. He arrived to events in unusual vehicles, in extravagant costumes, with theatrical timing. He gave interviews that were works of fiction and philosophy and comedy at once. He understood something that very few artists in his time understood. In the modern world, attention is a form of power, and he gathered it intentionally, relentlessly, and brilliantly. But no performance lasts forever. As Dalí moved into the 1970s, something began to change. The energy that had defined him for decades started to slow. His body, which he had dressed and presented with such theatricality, began to weaken. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a condition that affects movement and coordination. For a man who had shaped his very mustache like a work of art, losing control of his body was a particular cruelty. And then came the loss that ended something essential in him. In 1982, Gala died. She was 87 years old. She had been the center of Dalí's world for more than 50 years. And when she was gone, something in Dalí went quiet in a way it never had before. He stopped painting almost entirely. He moved to the Pubol Castle, which he had bought for Gala years earlier. He sat in the rooms she had lived in. He grieved in a way that was, for once, entirely private. No performance, no dramatic statement. Just a man who had lost the person who made the world make sense. He moved later to the castle of Pubol, and then to the Torre Galatea, right next to the Dalí Theatre-Museum in his hometown of Figueres. He had come full circle. The boy who was born in this small Spanish town, who had traveled the world, shocked continents, redefined art, was sitting quietly in the place where it all began. In 1984, there was a fire in his bedroom at Pubol Castle. It may have been an accident. The details remain unclear. Dalí survived but was deeply shaken. He spent his final years in the Torre Galatea. Visitors came. He rarely spoke. He listened to music. He sat near the building that held the largest collection of his work in the world. On January 23, 1989, Salvador Dalí died of heart failure. He was 84 years old. He was buried, at his own instruction, beneath the stage of his own museum, the Theatre-Museum in Figueres. He rests there today, directly below the dome he designed, surrounded by the dreams he spent a lifetime painting. Now think about that for a moment. A man who lived the most outward, public, theatrical life imaginable, chose to be buried inside his own art. He did not go to a cemetery. He went into the work. He became part of it permanently. Even his death was a Dalí painting. So, what do we take from the life of Salvador Dalí? He was not simple. He was not always kind. He was not easy to understand, and he did not try to be. He was contradictory and complicated, and sometimes deeply difficult. But here is what he was, without question. He was completely, unapologetically himself. In a world that tells us constantly to fit in, to be reasonable, to behave normally, to paint things the way they actually look, Dalí said no. He said, "I will paint the way my mind feels. I will show you the inside of a dream. I will make you look at a melting clock and ask yourself what you thought you knew about time." He taught us that imagination is not the opposite of intelligence. It is one of its highest forms. He taught us that the things that make you different, the anxieties, the confusions, the questions you can't answer, the images that haunt you, these are not problems to fix. They are materials to use. He taught us that loving deeply and being loved in return is not weakness. Dalí, one of the most dramatic personalities in the history of art, openly said he was nothing without Gala. He was not ashamed of needing someone. He was proud of it. And he taught us something about resilience, about continuing to create, to present yourself to the world, even when the world laughs or doubts or doesn't understand. He was rejected by schools. He was expelled from his own artistic movement. He was mocked for his personality, his commercialism, his eccentricity. And today, his face is on T-shirts on every continent, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. He didn't hide his strangeness. He amplified it. He built a life from it. And in doing so, he made room for every strange, creative, questioning mind that came after him. Every time you see that curling mustache, that melting clock, that impossible dreamlike image, remember the boy from Figueres, who didn't know if he was himself or someone else. Remember the student who was told he was too difficult to teach. Remember the man who lost the woman, who held his world together and kept going anyway. That is what a real life looks like, not a perfect arc, a real one. Now, I want to ask you something, and I would really love to read your answers in the comments below. Dalí spent his entire life creating from his confusion, from his fears, his questions, his sense of not quite belonging anywhere. So here is my question for you. Is there something in your life, a struggle, a question, a feeling of being different that you have always seen as a problem, but that might actually be your greatest strength? Tell me in the comments. You might be surprised what you discover when you write it down. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, think something new, or gave you a word or phrase in English that you want to remember, please like this video and subscribe to Woven English. Every story we tell here is chosen to grow your mind and your language at the same time. We are building something real here, and you are part of it. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. This is Woven English, where every story is a lesson, and every lesson is a story worth telling. Take care of yourselves, keep listening, keep growing, and I will see you in the next video.